Caleb Rowan led his horse along a narrow mountain pass to check the traps. As he passed a dry creek bed, Caleb caught sight of something motionless on the bank. He slowed down, his hand instinctively resting on the grip of his gun, a habit forged by too many years of solitude. It was an old Apache man. His body was thin but wiry, his eyes shut tight, breath shallow and uneven. His skin was weathered by the sun, lips cracked and dry, his chest bruised as if from a heavy fall. Caleb knelt down and gently touched the man's shoulder. The elder opened his eyes just a sliver, his voice barely a whisper. "Water, just a sip." Without hesitation, Caleb pulled out his canteen and lifted the man's head. The elder drank in slow, careful sips. A faint light began to return to his eyes. Caleb examined his injuries. This was no animal attack. He had likely fallen from the cliffs above, maybe while trying to escape hunger and thirst. Without thinking twice, Caleb hoisted the man onto his back and started the long trek home to his cabin. The old body weighed more than he expected, but Caleb did not stop, not even once. That night, he lit a fire, boiled water, and wrapped the elder tightly in blankets. The Apache man looked at him, his breath so faint it nearly disappeared into the sound of crackling flames. "You are kind," Caleb replied softly. "Just rest. You'll feel better in the morning." But by sunrise, the Apache man was gone, leaving behind a few strange symbols drawn on the dry earth. Perhaps a message of thanks. What Caleb did not know was that night had opened a path from which there would be no turning back. That afternoon, the sky was covered in thick, gray clouds, like a layer of cold ashes. Caleb was tending to the firewood inside his cabin when he suddenly heard heavy, deliberate footsteps outside. Each step seemed to press a deep, slow rhythm into the earth. He turned his head, his hand loosely resting on the grip of his gun. Standing at the doorway was an Apache woman so tall and broad-shouldered she had to duck slightly to pass through the wooden frame. Her build was powerful, like someone who hauled timber for a living. Muscles stood out clearly along her sun-darkened arms. Her black hair was tied back at the nape of her neck, and her face was a mix of strength and sorrow. She stood there in silence, like a living boulder that had stepped out from the mountainside. Caleb straightened up, his voice low. "Who are you looking for?" The woman did not answer right away. Her eyes moved slowly around the cabin at the fireplace, then back to Caleb, with a gaze dark and deep, like someone who had endured far too much. Finally, she spoke, softly but with every word crystal clear. "My name is Mira. The tribe sent me to repay the debt for Cato." Caleb's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of his chair. "I did not do it for a reward." Mira tilted her head just a little. The firelight danced across her face, revealing faint, old bruises around her wrists. "I am a widow," she said, her voice low and earthy like a drumbeat. "The tribe sends women like me to repay debts. If I refuse, they will kill me for disobeying." Caleb stared at her for a long time. A woman that strong still treated like a thing to be traded. Mira seemed to read his thoughts, because she stepped forward, closer to the firelight, so he could see the scars along her shoulder more clearly. "I have no place left to go," she said. "If you turn me away, I will die. The tribe will call me a traitor, and white men, they will hunt me too." Caleb exhaled hard through his nose and let go of the gun. He did not look at her like a burden, but like someone battered by a storm, too tired to find shelter anymore. "You can stay," he said, his voice steady and firm, like a stake being driven into the ground, "but not to serve me." Mira blinked once, as if those words caught her slightly off balance. Then she whispered, "Then, to survive." Caleb nodded. "To survive." Mira stepped fully into the cabin, and as the door closed behind her, Caleb felt it clearly. This desert had just sent him a strange wind, fierce, dangerous, and certain to change the quiet path of his life from that moment forward. The days that followed passed in a strange kind of quiet. Caleb was not used to having someone else in the cabin, but Mira did not make the space feel crowded. In fact, her presence felt more like an extra shadow pressed against the wooden walls, silent and steady. She woke earlier than he did, often before the first hint of dawn. Whenever Caleb opened his eyes, the fire in the stove was already lit. A pan of warm water set nearby, and Mira would be up on the porch, tightening loose roof planks with hands strong as iron clamps. Caleb would just stand and watch for a moment, then quietly walk away so he would not break her focus. Mira did everything without noise. Without trying to impress, she simply worked, like someone born to survive in a harsh world. One afternoon, Caleb saw her sitting by the fence, repairing the torn reins of his horse. Her head was bowed slightly, broad shoulders blocking most of the sunlight. Caleb placed a neatly folded piece of fabric on the table in front of her. "This belonged to my mother," he said softly. "An old cotton dress. If you need it." Mira looked at the cloth for a long time before lifting her gaze. Something in her sharp eyes softened. She took it, her large fingers brushing the thin fabric gently, as if afraid to tear it. She said nothing but gave a small nod. And for Mira, that meant more than words ever could. That night, Mira wore the dress. It was a little short for her tall frame and wide shoulders, but she seemed more at ease in it than in anything else she had worn. Standing near the fireplace, the glow of the flames warmed her dark skin and gave the old cotton a strange, quiet beauty. Mira sat beside Caleb closer than ever before, her eyes fixed on the fire, and she spoke quietly. "I want a new name." Caleb tilted his head toward her. "A new name?" She nodded slowly. "Not one given by the tribe, not a name for a widow, a name to live a different life." The fire flickered across her face. Caleb looked at her long enough to know she was not asking for a name. She was asking for a chance to leave her past behind. He answered slowly, his voice low and steady like desert stone. "Haven. Because this place is where you chose to stay." Mira smiled a real smile, the first he had seen from her. She lowered her forehead onto the back of Caleb's hand, an Apache gesture of acceptance. "Haven," she whispered. "I will keep it." Outside, the desert wind blew harder, but inside the cabin, the fire burned brighter than on any night before, as if, at last, the cabin truly had two people living in it. Late that afternoon, the wind shifted suddenly, carrying the scent of dust and rusted iron, the kind of smell that comes with men looking for trouble. Caleb sensed it before he ever heard the sound of hooves. Years of living alone had taught him to feel danger before it made a sound. Haven was out back, splitting firewood. Each strike of her axe echoed off the dry logs like a warning drum. Caleb only had to notice the slight stiffness in her back to know she felt it too. Something was off. 3 riders appeared beyond the tree line. Long coats, pistols slung lazily across their waists, and eyes that scanned the land like vultures hunting for a corpse. Caleb stepped out onto the front porch, his hands away from his gun but hanging in that loose way that said he could draw in a blink. The one in front spat on the ground, his voice stretched out and heavy with intent. "Word is there's an Apache woman built like a man hiding out in these parts. Just wondering, you seen anybody like that around here?" Caleb stared at him without blinking. "No one here belongs to you." The man glanced over Caleb's shoulder, catching a glimpse of Haven behind the curtain. His eyes lit up like a predator catching the scent of blood. "Swear I just saw someone inside. Pretty big figure." Caleb stepped forward just half a step, but enough to block the view. "Leave." But they did not leave. Another man tugged his reins, trying to peer inside. "That's Apache blood. Could fetch good money back with the tribe." No sooner had the words left his mouth than the curtain shifted and Haven stepped out. No fear in her. She stood beside Caleb, taller by half a head, her body solid like a slab of desert stone. The leader let out a low laugh. "Well now, look what we got." He started to dismount, but Caleb drew first. So fast, the 3 of them froze in place. Still, the leader was stubborn. He jumped off his horse. That was his mistake. Haven stepped forward. She reached out, grabbed his collar, and tossed him to the ground like a sack of straw. His face hit the dirt, dust flying everywhere. The other 2 reached for their guns, but Caleb had already raised his. His voice was low and cold as mountain stone. "Leave, unless you want to be buried here." They understood. In a blink, they turned their horses, dragging their leader through the dust behind them. As the hoofbeats faded into the distance, Haven stood breathing heavily, her hand still trembling from the adrenaline. She spoke without looking at him. "I brought trouble to your door. You should let me go." Caleb turned toward her, his voice steady and firm, like a stake driven deep into the ground. "Haven, I chose to keep you here. No one else gets to decide that." Haven closed her eyes, like someone who had just been handed a fistful of warm earth after wandering too long. Thank you for being here with us. If this story brought back memories of red-dusted afternoons and hoofbeats echoing in your chest, then subscribe to my channel, so each day we can sit together again, and I'll tell you another Western tale. After the encounter with the 3 bounty hunters, Caleb's homestead felt different, not because of any looming danger, but because both he and Haven now understood they had become a kind of family. The invisible distance that had once stood between them grew thinner with each passing day. Haven helped Caleb repair the broken fence, her large hands gripping the wood like a seasoned blacksmith. When Caleb lifted the other end, their eyes met by chance, and in that brief moment, both went quiet. Unsure why something had shifted inside them, night fell faster than usual. A cold wind slipped through the cracks in the door. Caleb was sitting by the fire when Haven came in, wearing his mother's old wool shawl. The small cloth on her broad frame made her look both powerful and strangely vulnerable. She sat down beside him, closer than ever before. Close enough that he could feel the warmth of her shoulder. The silence stretched long between them until Haven finally spoke. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Her voice was rough, trembling slightly, but not from the cold. Caleb did not look away. "I was just thinking. It's been a long time since this house held anyone else's voice." Haven tilted her head, her eyes darkening as if weighing something deeper. "As for me," she said slowly, "it's been a long time since I've been near a man." Caleb froze. The words dropped between them with the weight of truth, the kind that shrinks a room down to just 2 people, and the sound of crackling fire. Haven looked at him directly, no flinching, no shame. "And you?" Caleb swallowed. "It's been a long time for me too." She did not smile. She did not blush. She simply reached out her hand, large, rough, strong from a life spent fighting through the world, and placed it on his chest. Her grip was clumsy, a little too firm, but the warmth of it sank through the fabric and into his bones. "You want me," she said, like stating a desert truth, dry and undeniable. "Or do you just pity me?" Caleb did not flinch. He placed his hand over hers, holding it there. "I want you, Haven. Not because of your tribe. Not because I owe you. Because of who you are." In the firelight, Haven's eyes softened, like coals stirred gently by wind. She leaned in closer, her breath warm against his neck. No more words were needed. None were spoken. That night, inside the small wooden cabin, 2 people who had lived like forgotten fragments finally gave each other warmth, not out of duty, not out of debt, but because they had truly chosen each other. The next morning, pale golden sunlight washed over the homestead, but it did nothing to ease the unease building in Caleb's chest. It was too quiet, the kind of silence that did not belong to the desert. Haven was carrying water up from the well when Caleb's horse suddenly let out a sharp whinny. She turned her head toward the trail, and her broad shoulders tensed instantly. "The tribe," she said softly. Caleb stepped up beside her. In the distance, a group of Apache riders approached, 7 of them. Their posture was fierce, not the kind meant for a friendly visit. They stopped at the edge of the yard, forming a wide arc like a drawn bow. At the front rode a warrior with a lightning bolt tattoo across his face, Yatuk. He looked at Caleb, then at Haven the way one looks at something broken. "Cato is dead," Yatuk said, his voice heavy and hard as stone. "The debt is paid. The widow Mira must return to the tribe immediately." Haven stood tall, as if rooted to the earth like an old desert tree. "I will not return. This is my home." "This is an order," Yatuk growled. "You defy the tribe. Your life stains the land." Caleb stepped forward, placing himself halfway in front of Haven. "She stays with me." Yatuk laughed, the bitter laugh of a man who had never known defeat. "A cast-off woman. Why would you keep her?" Haven did not let Caleb speak. She stepped up beside him, towering over all of them, her hand clenched at her side but her voice calm and cold as winter stone. "My name is Haven. I have been free since the day I met this man. I no longer belong to the tribe." The words silenced the Apache riders, not because they respected her but because they no longer had the right to claim her. Yatuk gave Caleb one last look, a glance that promised this was not the end, but he pulled his reins and turned his horse. The others followed, leaving without a word. When the riders vanished beyond the sand dunes, Haven stood still, her breath long and slow. like someone who had finally slipped a noose from their neck. Caleb gently placed a hand on her strong arm. "Are you all right?" Haven stared toward the direction the tribe had gone, her eyes dark but steady. "From now on, no one owns me. No one." Then she turned to him, and her gaze softened. "Only free to stay." Caleb nodded slowly, like a vow spoken without words, and in that moment, in the wide, wild desert, they were no longer two lost souls. They were each other's choice. After the tribe's riders were gone, the desert seemed to change color. The wind no longer carried the scent of threat, but instead turned warm, light, with the faint trace of new dry grass. To Caleb, that air felt like the house had finally opened its doors after years of being sealed shut. To Haven, it was the first time in her life she knew what it felt like not to be owned by anyone. Day by day, Haven helped Caleb build a new fence, twice as strong as the old one. Her muscular hands lifted each beam as if it weighed nothing, while Caleb simply held it steady. When the sun rose high, they sat in the shade of the barn, Haven chewing dried meat, Caleb sipping black coffee. They did not talk much, but the silence between them no longer felt heavy. One hot afternoon, Haven suddenly stopped while hauling water. She set the bucket down, her large hand resting gently over her lower stomach, a gesture so subtle, Caleb almost missed it. He stepped closer. "What is it?" Haven did not answer right away. She looked down at her belly as if something were beginning to grow from deep within the desert itself. Then she looked up, and her eyes were clearer, stronger than he had ever seen. "Caleb," she said, her voice low but softer than it had ever been. "I think I am pregnant." Caleb froze, as if a wave of desert heat had hit him square in the chest. He could not speak for a few seconds. He just stared into her deep, dark eyes where there was no longer shadow, but something beginning to glow from within. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Afraid to break the moment, Haven gave a small nod. Then she took his hand and placed it gently over her belly. "This child," she said, "is my choice. Not a tribal command, not a debt to repay." She looked straight at him. "I want this, because it is ours." Caleb felt something tighten in his chest, a kind of emotion he had long forgotten he could still feel, buried beneath years of loneliness. He bowed his head, his forehead touching hers the way she had once done with him. The night she took her name, Haven, he breathed. "Family. I thought I would never have that again." Haven smiled. Not the smile of someone soft, but the quiet, grounded smile of an Apache warrior who had finally found peace. In the blazing summer heat of the desert, they stood there, two people cast out by the world, beginning to learn how to live again. That summer arrived with waves of heat that burned the skin, yet for Caleb, it was the gentlest season of his life. Haven began waking later, her hand resting on her belly each morning, as if to make sure what was growing inside her was real. Her eyes softened a little more each day, shedding the guarded look of a wild creature that had lived too long on the edge of life and death. Caleb started building a small room onto the side of the cabin. Each strike of the hammer into wood felt like sealing off a chapter of his past. Haven watched him, her strong arms wrapped around a bundle of Apache herbs she had been growing since learning she was with child. "To keep away bad winds," she said, "and so the child knows it carries two bloodlines." Inside the cabin, a new item appeared on the wall. Cato's deerskin cloak. Haven hung it there herself, with quiet reverence. Caleb saw the look in her eyes, not that of a widow sent by the tribe, but of someone preserving the past on her own terms. That night, as the desert wind slipped in through the small window, Haven sat beside Caleb by the fire. No longer at a cautious distance, she leaned into him, and her large frame made Caleb feel protected more than the other way around. "The first day I came here," Haven said, her voice low like fire breath, "I was just a thing the tribe sent away, something that no longer had value." Caleb turned slightly, but she went on. "But you." Haven paused, as if searching through old memories. "You looked at me like I was a person, not a tool, not something to follow someone else's orders." Caleb placed his hand over hers, gently tracing the faded scar on her wrist, the last trace of the life she had escaped. "Because you became Haven," he said, his voice thick with a depth he rarely showed. Not a debt to be paid, but someone who chose me, even before I dared to choose you. Haven leaned her forehead against his temple, an Apache gesture of lifelong bond. The fire cracked softly, golden light dancing across their faces like the day's final warmth, reaching out to touch them both. Outside, the desert still stretched endlessly. The wind still bit hard, the night was still cold, but inside that small, weathered cabin, with the warm glow of firelight and the faint scent of Apache herbs rising from the corner of the room, two people, once abandoned by both life and tribe, sat side by side, as if no other place in the world could ever hold them. They had chosen each other, and they would stay forever. My friends, sometimes love does not arrive wrapped in promises or sweet embraces. It comes in the quiet moment when two people simply choose to stay. In a world that has made them feel like there's no place left for them, it is not loud, it does not shine. It is a small fire burning through the desert night. Real love is not about finding someone perfect. It is about finding someone who makes you feel less alone in your own life. Above all, I hope you are safe and happy wherever you may be. I love you all, the cherished audience of Wild West storytelling. Let me know what you thought of this story. Leave a comment down below. Type the number 8 if you enjoyed this tale. And do not forget to subscribe for more gripping Western stories to come.